Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this Northeast Cover Crop Council short webinars. I'm Victoria Ackroyd, Program Manager for the Northeast Cover Crops Council, and my co-host is Susan Roulette, who is with the University of Vermont Extension, and also welcome Heather Darby, who is also with University of Vermont Extension and technically is the chair of our board. Today's session qualifies for 0.5 crop management CCA CEUs. We will put the slide up with the needed information and QR code at the end if you need those CEUs. This talk's going to be about 20 minutes long. There will be 10 minutes at the end for questions. By all means, please feel free to throw your questions in the chat as you think of them, or most definitely you are welcome to speak up at the end. This webinar is being recorded. We also have a captioner, so check the comments in the chat for information if you need that facility. And the recording and the slides will be available on the University of Vermont website after this webinar. Susan's been pretty quick about getting them up. Today's speaker is Chad Cochrane. He is the state agronomist for USDA NRCS in New Hampshire. He's also an NECCC board member. He works statewide promoting conservation agronomy, sustainable agricultural practices, and soil health management systems. Chad has been a lead supporter and promoter of no-till planting methods, the use of cover crops, and irrigation water management on all sizes and types of farms. Chad, thanks for speaking today. The screen is yours.
Thank you, Victoria. Yeah, excited to be here, everyone. I will share my screen. And present theoretically. There we go. Does that look good? All right. Okay, great. Yeah, thanks everyone. Happy afternoon. My name is Chad Cochrane, and if you're not familiar with the NRCS, we're an agency within the USDA that really helps farmers implement conservation work on their, working agricultural lands, everything from commodity crops up through forest lands. And my job is really to promote conservation in our annual tillage and cropping systems. And cover cropping is a huge part of what I do. And my job is very much with the hands-on application of things. So I think that fits this topic very well when we're talking about the methods of getting cover crops in the ground and growing in our fields. I'm not going to talk a lot about research, really more my experiences and takeaways that I've had in 15, 20 years now of helping farmers get cover cropping done. And I guess I want to start the discussion, like I do really with all cover crop discussions, with why we're doing it in the first place. That for farmers or professionals out there helping farmers are thinking about cover crops in terms of goals. What do you want to get out of it? Some examples up here: nitrogen fixation, growing a lot of biomass for organic matter. Do you just want to tie up some excess nutrients, or kind of at the very lowest level, perhaps just get something growing on that field so we don't have erosion in the fall? And depending on what your goals are, it's going to determine, and I think the things we often think about, what species am I going to select? What kind of mix might I want to do? What is my timing that I want to do? But along with that is, what is the method I'm going to choose to get the cover crop growing in the first place? And depending on what your goals are, and also what your restrictions are, can make a big difference on whether or not you're actually getting to where you want to go. So restrictions, I'm thinking about timing, and I don't mean labor type timing. I mean, what is your timing window for actually seeding the cover crop? Do you have enough window in the fall or whenever you're planting the cover crop for it to do what you want it to do? If you think about that list of goals there, nitrogen fixation and large biomass, they're going to take time. And do you have the time in your rotation to get those things done? Labor, though, is a restriction. Fuel, and then, kind of capital for new equipment purchases. Is that something that a farmer has the room for in their budget, or do they need to just kind of make do with what they have? And I think you know, what we all have to wrestle with is we can't have it all in these situations. So you need to really prioritize. And that's what I tend to do a lot with growers, is work them through their own priorities, because they may not be doing that on their own, or it's just kind of so overwhelming. They're not sure where to go first. So I'd say that's where I start. Even with a topic of methods, I really start with, what are your goals? What are your restrictions? And are you getting to where you want to go? And when I started thinking about conceptualizing a discussion here for methods of planting cover crops, my head kind of started swimming, because there's a lot. And I decided just to break it down into two general categories with kind of some gray area in between the two. But methods that I'm going to call broadcast seeding, and then methods that are really drilling a cover crop. I don't think those are going to be surprising to anyone out there, but it's the framework that I used here to talk about it today. And broadcasting, you know, I guess historically, when we think about that, we have some sort of spreader, and then we're running another pass with a tool to incorporate those seeds into the soil. Another classic broadcast method is aerial seeding, whether we're talking about an airplane or a helicopter or drones today. Aerial seeding, where we're spreading seeds. And then kind of things get a little more blurry when we start talking about ways that we can use things like air seeders that we mount to various pieces of equipment. It gives us a ton of flexibility with broadcast seedings. And then I'll just briefly mention, I felt I would be remiss if I didn't, that there are some methodologies for mixing your seeds in with your manure injection system, and when you're doing your fall manure application, seeding at the same time. I don't have great confidence in them, but I do want to just kind of mention that it is another method out there. If you want to do some additional homework on that, feel free. When I've seen it done, I wasn't terribly impressed with the results, so I'll just leave it at that. Moving on to broadcast seeding, and I should probably say first off is that I'm gonna show a lot of pictures of equipment, because the equipment is what gets the work done, and none of the equipment that I'm showing in any of these slides is any sort of promotion for one brand or another. I try to get a lot of different brands in here. A lot of machinery companies offer different makes and models on the same general idea, but it's really less about the actual piece of equipment and how the farmer is choosing to use it. So they're just for illustrative purposes, absolutely no endorsement. Do need to say that. But broadcast seedings is, in my mind, again, conceptually, is where we're really just scattering seeds on the soil surface. And a benefit of this is that they are distributed evenly, but because they're spread in that method, there's no rows, which is potentially a downside in some people's minds and in some situations for some other methods like drilling. The, I think, huge win on broadcast seeding is that it's very flexible, and often we can use equipment that the farmer may already have, which from an economic standpoint is a huge win. They may already have some sort of lime or fertilizer spreader that can double as a seed spreader as well as the incorporation equipment may be something that they already have on farm. The other thing that's great about broadcast seeding is that it's fast. And that's always important for farmers for obvious reasons. Time is money, just like any other business, and they're often facing labor shortages. So fast is good. I think the huge drawback, hence the bold type, is that we get less consistent results, generally speaking. It's just harder to have control over broadcast seedings and over the way we then incorporate that seed into the soil. So here you can see just a couple of different spreaders, 3-point hitch mounted spreaders, toe behind spreaders. Keeping in line with like tips and tricks here for cover crop methods, there was a lot of concern at first when we started doing cover crop mixes that if we used pre-mixed seeds that they would settle out in the bins or in the hoppers as we did our seedings. I don't typically see that. with pull behind units. I don't see that with grain drills, but I do see that with 3-point hitch mounted PTO driven equipment like that Vicon spreader in the upper right. So they vibrate a lot in some cases, depending on the make and model, and that can be enough vibration to actually settle seed out while you're using the machine. So just keep that in mind. I don't worry much about seed separation. Kind of it gradates itself based on size in most cases, except those 3-point hitch PTO driven units. Just another slide here to show some additional broadcast seeding ideas. I don't deal a ton with grain production, but there is a whole market out there for attaching air seeders onto combine heads. So you're seeding directly as you are combining the crop. The seed gets dispersed underneath the combine head and then covered up with chaff from the back of the combine. Stole a picture from UVM extension here, their high boy. So they have attached an air seeder onto a high clearance sprayer, and they use drop nozzles to distribute the seed, interseed down inside the crop. And lastly, something that maybe is gaining or starting to gain a foothold is using drones for doing cover crop seeding. This was a demonstration I was at where they were flying a drone and we were using the blue tarp there in the photo to help calibrate its seeding rate. It was incredibly difficult because the prop wash from the drone would blow all the seeds off the tarp. It was kind of funny. But the prop wash from something like a helicopter or a drone is a helpful tool really in helping to drive the cover crop seed down inside the canopy when we're interseeding with those tools. So there's our kind of some broadcast seeding methods and at least the way I'm defining them. And, you know, they do get a bit of a bad rap for being inconsistent. Some of that is deserved. Some of it maybe isn't. You can see kind of the bottom photos here are fairly well established and even stands of broadcast cover crops. I can see from the radishes in that bottom left photo that the way that that was disked in, some of the radishes got buried too deep, others did not, and we can almost see the radishes in rows. That's an indicator to me that that disking was done too aggressively for that small seeded crop. So you kind of get an eye for these things eventually and start to see some of the shortcomings, but I think the farmer considered that a huge success. The upper photo there is a springtime photo of an aerial seeded cover crop. So we used a helicopter to seed this into standing corn a few weeks before silage harvest. And due to the weather that fall, you know, we really did have a fairly moderate to poor stand that was fairly uneven. So just again, it's the nature of the beast, I think, with broadcast seedings, but it's really the way you get it done. And a lot of that is how you're choosing to incorporate the seed. If you don't incorporate the seed, like that aerial seeding photo I showed you there in the upper center, the results are very inconsistent oftentimes. So I really encourage farmers, if they are going to broadcast, to take the extra time, and I did say extra time, to incorporate. And that does start to cut down on that time efficiency piece of broadcast seeding. It is most efficient whenever you can do something with a single pass. You're also using less fuel and you're causing less soil compaction. But when we're talking about getting a good cover crop established, you really need that seed soil contact, and some light tillage is absolutely worth it in my mind with broadcast seeding. There are a number of different ways to do it though. Disc harrows in my mind are often a poor choice because they're too aggressive. You generally don't have good depth control of most disc harrows, and seeds get buried too deep in a lot of cases with the species that we're trying to plant, small seeded especially. And if we're doing a mix of species, it's very challenging. Cultipackers are great. I don't see them on farms as much as I used to, like when I was a kid growing up. But they're a great tool, I think. Vertical tillage now, we start to see more and more out there on farms. And I think they can be a great tool for cover crop incorporation, but the aggressiveness is very adjustable. So I would definitely say if you're doing a cover crop, you're not trying to do a lot of soil disturbance. You're just trying to get that seed to have some soil contact, and you don't need to have soil, flying up 2 feet behind the implement as you're going down through the field. And I'll just lastly say kind of a cool other option that I don't see too much, but I know UVM is doing some work with are chain discs or Phillips harrows, which is kind of a brand name. They're the photos up on the screen right now, and they are a small disc where the discs themselves are on a flexible chain, and they can kind of work with the soil contours a little bit, and they just by design don't go very deep, and you can go quite fast with them. So that's I think a really nice low intensity shallow till cover crop incorporation tool that I don't see too often. And by the way, these are giant implements on the screen because that's what the manufacturers love to put on their websites because it's very impressive. But a lot of these implements can scale down quite a bit too, and they have models that are smaller and more appropriate for mid-scale farming. I want to talk a bit here about air seeders because this is a huge option to make cover crop broadcast seedings more flexible. And these are some common varieties that I see on farms from some manufacturers here on the screen. But they all do basically the same thing. They're metering out seed quite precisely, and then they're pushing that seed out across the implement using hoses or tubes. And then whenever those hoses stop, there's a diffuser plate, which is then broadcasting that seed in a smaller area. So instead of trying to throw the seed everywhere across the field, they're doing it in a much more controlled manner. And these can be attached onto all sorts of different tillage equipment to make a one-pass, I'm still calling broadcast tool. They're fairly cost effective for what they do, and if you can use your existing equipment to get the job done, that's often a huge win for farmers. They really do, I think, help with some of the downsides of a second tillage pass. That in mind, manufacturers have started to offer these as a unit that you can buy from the factory. These are just a couple here that I saw, and they're often called cover crop seeders. And they are, generally speaking, a vertical till tool in a lot of cases with an air seeder attached to it. Again, with vertical tillage, disturbance is always my biggest concern because they can be run very aggressively, and I don't think they have to. And you can kind of see the differences in these two slides. The Kuhn model there is run in a fairly aggressive way, where the Great Plains on the right is not. And when we're talking about getting cover crops in the ground, you don't need a ton of soil disturbance. You just need good seed soil contact. And it works against some of the soil health benefits we're trying to get with a cover crop when we do excessive disturbance, which is a part of my concern with disc harrows as well. All right, moving on to aerial interseeding here. I will say you can do aerial seeding whenever you want, but the big draw, I think, with aerial seeding is that you can seed into a standing crop. So, that is interseeding. So trying to get the cover crop established while our cash crop is on the field. That's the big draw because you're obviously flying right over the top of it. And we did some trials with aerial interseeding with helicopter a few years ago. Helicopter is the only option in our particular area for interseeding. And sadly, it makes it very expensive and not really very approachable for most farmers. But we did a couple trials, and I just wanted to point out that we had some wildly different results based on the way the farmers were managing their fields. So these two fields where we did this interseeding were quite literally next to one another. Same soil type, same location in the county. They were right next to each other, seeded the same day, exactly the same way, all of that. We seeded them at V5, so relatively early, kind of knee-high corn in the growing season. And then we wanted this cover crop to get established, kind of chill and mellow out in the bottom of the corn. And then when we harvested, it would be there and look beautiful. We had great success with this on our no-till corn, where the farmer had been doing no-till for probably 3 to 5 years at that point. Had a nice granular aggregated surface structure. He was cover cropping. It looked really nice. And then we've got the tilled field, which is rotated between corn and potatoes and has some of the worst aggregate stability numbers from a Cornell cash test that I've ever seen. And you can see that here. We've got a lot of surface crusting on this field in that photo, and we got practically nothing. This isn't like a photo I took of the worst spot. This is really how the field looked. There was practically nothing in the field. There were a couple wet draws that had some establishment, but just remarkably different. And we also, at the same time, fearing this, we did broadcast with just a PTO mounted, 3-point hitch mounted spreader on a small section of the field, and used a tine harrow to do some light scuffing of the soil surface to break up that surface crusting, and we had a pretty decent catch of it there. So you can kind of see where the incorporation or lack thereof with aerial seeding can be a problem, but it's not quite even that easy. It depends on the way those soils look and are managed, whether or not you're going to have success. I'll move on to what I termed direct interseeding, which is a little different than aerial interseeding because we're actually getting the soil down into, getting the seed down into the soil and getting it incorporated there. It could be with units that are basically like a grain drill or a toolbar with drill implements on it, like the bottom right photo, or the upper photo is just a slightly different take on like a broadcast and incorporation tool within the row. All pretty cool ideas. And they get that seed down into the soil directly, and that's really key. And they do the incorporation at the same time. I want to kind of stress, I guess, a few things that happen with this. I guess the good one is that we don't trap any of the seed in the crop canopy or soil residues by doing it this way versus aerial seeding. So literally all of the seed is getting into the soil. That's a huge win. But you do have to be very careful about residual pesticide interactions. And I know that's going to be next week's topic. So that should be pretty interesting. That is something you absolutely need to pay attention here because a lot of our residual herbicides we'll take do a number on our cover crop species. And all interseeding is highly, highly, highly moisture dependent. And that ended up being one thing that drove farmers away from interseeding in our area. We did a fair amount of trials with this with different methods, including like that blue interseeder drill there. And depending on moisture, and it could be moisture as in rainfall or moisture levels across the field. We had different cover crop establishment rates, and that became very, very challenging for the farmers when you've got some areas where the cover crops are great, other areas where they're not. You're not meeting your goals and priorities, and it can make it very hard, especially with no-till planting, to have your planter adjusted when you're going through different types of residue all over the field. So they decided they wanted something far more consistent, and they went toward drilling in most cases. But one other thing, and I put the grimace and steering wheel emoji on the slide to remind myself that a lot of the feedback I got from the farmers that were trying these tools was that it was a white knuckle event because you are driving this equipment down through your field. And you're driving equipment that could easily, it's doing some light tillage, so it could easily knock out your corn rows. And if you're on, auto steer with RTK, you're probably made in the shade to get this done. If you're doing it by hand and by eye, it was slow going and pretty anxiety provoking for the farmers doing it. So I just wanted to pass that along. That's something to keep in mind. Lastly, want to land here on grain drills or air drills, larger scale air drills, as the most precise, most consistent way to get cover crops established. They're not without their own flaws, but with the farmers I work with that really start treating their cover crop like a crop, and they really start banking on the benefits and the services that cover crops provide, this is where they end up going. The downsides being that it's slower, but it's single pass, but it's slower than a single pass tool like a vertical till tool with an air seeder on it. They do hold a large amount of seed, which is really nice. And the huge benefit for a lot of farmers I work with, because I promote no-till a lot, is that this is the no-till option to get cover crops in the ground and get good seed soil contact. So it tends to push people in that direction. If this is not a piece of equipment the farm currently has, in our area, we have a lot of rental programs for drills now through the conservation districts. So that's something to look for. And if you don't have in your area, maybe to get districts or other partners involved in rental programs. But the farmers may need to buy them. They're definitely not cheap. We have some farmers that have used their equip payments for cover cropping. Instead of kind of in their mind thinking, oh, this is a seed payment, they're like, okay, this is my money I'm going to put toward my drill. So that's pretty cool too. It's just a different way of thinking about that equip payment that you're getting. A lot of people worry about rows. I think it depends on how well established you're getting that cover crop. You know, the bottom right photo going into fall looking like that, those rows aren't great. We have a lot of bare soil, but the one on the left, which was planted earlier, kind of right next to each other, is looking great. Great soil cover. You can barely see the rows. The top photo was a veggie farm. They got that planted in mid-August, and the rows are just not there at all. And I just want to land on one other kind of tip, is that if you're working with a farmer that rolls cover crops, like this grower I work with that does pumpkins and squash on these beautiful mats of cover crop, he always tells me to tell people that if you're using a drill, to drill the opposite direction that you plant, so that you're not trying to roll down those rows and you're rolling across them and they lay nice and flat. Seems dead simple when you think about it, but it's something he struggled with for a while and then realized he's just got to think in the fall when he cover crops, he's got to run the drill the opposite direction of the way he runs his planter. So that is all I had. I think we're kind of right there for time.
We're right for time. Thank you, Chad. Susan's going to go on ahead and put up the screen for the CCA CEUs if you need that. We do have maybe a minute for a question if anyone wants to speak up. A lot of great pictures and great information there, Chad. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I'm not going to try to provoke conversation today. We have one more minute and we try to be respectful of everybody's lunch hour. So if anyone does think of a question later, feel free to email me, vackroyd@umd.edu, and I can pass along the question. Or Chad, of course, is an NRCS employee. You can certainly find him just by Googling his name, no doubt. And with that said, thank you everybody for joining us today. We'll get the recording and the slides up as soon as possible. Hopefully you'll join us again next week. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.